You're lying in the snow at the edge of a silent forest, your body pressed so low to the ground that even your breath feels like something that must be controlled. The surface beneath you is firm, packed hard under a thin layer of powder that softens its shape but not its resistance. Cold has already moved past discomfort. It settles deeper than that, into a place where sensation becomes quiet and distant, no longer something you react to, but something you accept. Ahead of you, the world narrows. Before we settle further into the silence, take a moment to prepare the space around you. Lower the light. Let the room grow quiet. If you find value in slow, reflective history like this, you can subscribe and return whenever you need a place where the past unfolds without urgency. And let us know where you're listening from, or which moment stays with you the most. You're listening to Echoes of War. Trees stand in long, unmoving lines, their branches heavy with snow that has not shifted in hours. The space between them is open just enough to hold distance, but not enough to reveal it clearly. Shapes exist there, but they do not separate themselves easily. The light is flat, colorless, stretched thin across the horizon as if morning has not yet decided to arrive. Nothing moves. Not the air. Not the trees. Not the surface of the snow. The silence is complete, the kind that does not feel empty, but full, as if it is holding something in place rather than allowing anything to pass through. And somewhere within that stillness, something does not belong. It does not reveal itself all at once. At first, it exists only as a difference too small to hold on to, a line that does not follow the surface of the snow, a shape that interrupts the stillness without rising above it. You do not move closer. You remain where you are, letting the image settle, returning to it the way the eye returns to something it cannot yet explain. It remains. The longer you look, the less it disappears. Snow rests along its edges, not freshly fallen, but shaped, pressed into place with a care that does not disturb the surface around it. Nothing about it is sharp. Nothing stands out. And yet it does not belong to the natural pattern of the ground. The outline begins to hold. Not clearly, not completely, but enough that it no longer dissolves when your attention shifts. A slight rise where the surface has been compressed. A length that extends forward in quiet alignment. It does not move. It does not adjust. It simply remains where it has been, as if it has already been there longer than you have been watching. The forest does not acknowledge it. No branch shifts. No snow falls from above. The air continues to rest without movement, holding the same silence that has defined everything here. What exists within that silence remains contained within it, without drawing attention to itself. You begin to understand what you are seeing, not through sudden clarity, but through persistence. The shape is not part of the ground. It is resting within it. It has been placed there with intention, then left undisturbed long enough to become indistinguishable from everything around it. A body lies beneath the snow, low, aligned, reduced to form rather than presence. The face remains close to the surface, partially shielded by a shallow rise that breaks its outline without revealing it. There is no movement to confirm it, no breath visible in the air, nothing that separates it clearly from the ground it rests upon, only the continuation of stillness. And within that stillness, the body remains, as if it has learned not only to stay, but to disappear without ever leaving. The ground that holds stillness. Morning does not arrive with light so much as with a gradual thinning of darkness. The sky remains pale, a muted surface that reflects no clear source, only the quiet persistence of winter itself. Snow that settled through the night lies undisturbed, its surface smooth in a way that suggests nothing has crossed it, nothing has claimed it. The forest stands unchanged. Trees rise in long, vertical lines, their trunks dark against the white, their branches heavy but unmoving. What was present in the night remains present now, carried forward without interruption. Beneath that stillness, the ground holds its shape. It is not flat, though it appears so. Small rises and shallow depressions remain hidden beneath the snow, shaping the way weight is carried and distributed across the surface. A body resting here does not lie evenly. It adjusts subtly to what cannot be seen. A shift of pressure through the arms, a careful placement of knees and elbows, a continuous negotiation with the ground that does not announce itself but must still be understood. The position is already established. It was chosen before the night ended, before the light began to change, and it has not been reconsidered since. The body remains low, aligned along a narrow stretch where the trees open just enough to allow distance to exist. Not wide enough to expose, but not so narrow that vision becomes confined. It is a space that balances concealment and sight, shaped not by chance, but by repetition, a place returned to, learned over time, understood without needing to be re-evaluated. The snow around it has been shaped with the same restraint. Nothing excessive. Nothing that would suggest disturbance. A shallow rise in front, built not as a wall but as a continuation of the ground, soft enough to blend into the surrounding surface. It breaks the outline without drawing attention. It exists not to hide completely, but to reduce the certainty of what might be seen from a distance. Breath moves through this space carefully. Each exhale is directed downward, into the snow, absorbed before it can rise and linger in the air. The cold takes it quickly, dissolving it into nothing before it can mark the position. There is no visible cloud, no trace left behind. The body has learned that even breath can reveal more than movement if left uncontrolled. The hands remain steady, not through effort, but through familiarity. They rest where they have rested before, holding the same weight, maintaining the same alignment. There is no tension in them, only the absence of unnecessary movement. Muscles do not tighten unless required. They remain in a state that allows endurance, not action, a quiet readiness that does not seek to express itself. You observe from a distance that does not interfere. The space between you and the figure is filled with the same stillness that surrounds it, creating a separation that feels both protective and deliberate. To move closer would not reveal more. It would only disrupt what is already complete. The clarity here does not come from proximity, but from patience, from allowing the eye to adjust, to recognize patterns that do not immediately stand apart from the environment. The ground continues to hold everything in place. It does not shift. It does not respond. It carries the weight without acknowledgement, as it carries the snow, the trees, the quiet. There is no indication that anything rests upon it that does not belong there. The agreement between body and earth is complete. One does not impose on the other. Both remain as they are, unchanged by contact. Time extends through the morning without distinction. There is no moment where the day clearly begins. Light increases slightly, but not enough to alter what can be seen. Shadows do not move. The air remains still. What was visible before remains visible now, and what was hidden remains hidden. The passage of time does not introduce variation. It reinforces what is already present. The position holds, not because it must, but because there is no reason for it to change. Stillness is not being maintained. It has already been achieved. And within it, the body remains aligned with the ground, the breath absorbed into the snow, the form reduced to something that does not draw attention to itself, even as it continues to exist. The longer the position is held, the less it feels like something being done. What began as placement becomes absorption. The body settles not only into the snow, but into the idea of remaining there without change. Muscles that once held tension release it gradually, not into movement, but into stillness itself. Weight redistributes in small, almost imperceptible ways, guided by discomfort that is acknowledged but not answered. There is no adjustment large enough to be seen, only a quiet negotiation beneath the surface, where pressure shifts just enough to allow continuation. The cold deepens as time passes, though it does not announce its arrival. It enters slowly, moving through layers that offer resistance only for a time. Fabric stiffens where moisture has gathered. Skin loses sensitivity in the smallest points first. Fingertips, the edge of the face, the parts most exposed to air that does not warm. Sensation does not disappear entirely. It changes. It becomes distant, less immediate, as if the body is no longer receiving information with the same urgency as before. The ground continues to hold. Its firmness is constant, unaffected by the weight resting upon it. What changes is the way the body understands that firmness. What once felt uneven becomes expected. What once required attention fades into the background of awareness. The surface does not adapt. The body does. There is no attempt to remain comfortable. Comfort would require movement, and movement would disturb the agreement that has already been established. Instead, the body accepts a narrower range of possibility, a space where endurance replaces adjustment, where the absence of change becomes the condition that must be preserved. Discomfort is not resisted. It is included. The line of sight remains fixed. It extends forward through the narrow opening between the trees, resting on a distance that does not move. There is no searching within that distance, no scanning from side to side. The eyes remain aligned with a single direction, allowing the field of vision to settle into familiarity. Over time, the details within it become clearer not because they change, but because they are seen repeatedly. The same branches, the same shadows, the same subtle variations in the surface of the snow, all of it becomes known without being actively examined. You notice how little is required for this to continue. No signal marks the passing of time. No event interrupts the stillness. The body does not count minutes or measure duration. It exists within a span that has no clear boundaries, held in place by the absence of interruption rather than the presence of structure. There is nothing to anticipate, nothing to prepare for beyond what is already being maintained. The forest remains unchanged. It does not acknowledge the passage of the morning. Light remains flat, without direction. The snow reflects it evenly, offering no contrast that might define shape or depth more clearly than before. Sound does not travel. Even the smallest disturbance would be absorbed before it could carry far enough to matter. What exists here remains contained within itself. The hands continue to rest where they were placed. They do not tighten. They do not adjust their hold. The contact between skin and wood remains constant, shaped by familiarity rather than effort. Over time, the distinction between holding and resting becomes less clear. The object is no longer something being gripped. It is something that remains where it has been positioned, supported without conscious reinforcement. Breath continues, quiet and controlled. It does not quicken. It does not deepen. It remains consistent, shaped not by the needs of the moment, but by the requirements of the condition. Air moves in and out without drawing attention to itself, absorbed into the larger stillness that surrounds everything here. Even the rhythm of it becomes less noticeable, fading into the background of awareness until it feels as though it belongs to the environment as much as to the body. Time does not pass. It accumulates. Each moment rests upon the last without replacing it, building a continuity that has no visible edge. There is no progression toward anything. No movement toward a different state. Only the continuation of what has already been established, extended outward through duration that does not need to be measured to be understood. The position remains. The ground holds. The cold settles deeper, not as a force to be resisted, but as a condition that has already been accepted. And within that condition, nothing changes. Not because nothing could happen, but because nothing needs to. The weight of air. Air does not move, but it is not empty. It rests over the ground in a way that gives it presence, a quiet density that fills the space between the trees without shifting or breaking apart. There is no wind to carry it, no current to shape it. It remains where it is, held in place by the same stillness that governs everything else. Breathing becomes the only visible interaction with it, the only indication that it can be entered and left again. The cold it carries is steady. It does not arrive in waves. It does not fluctuate. It remains constant, settling into the open spaces of the forest and holding there without variation. The body receives it with each breath, drawing it inward in controlled measures, allowing it to pass through without resistance. There is no attempt to warm it, no effort to change its nature. It is accepted as it is, because it cannot be anything else. The space in front remains unchanged. Distance holds its position, neither expanding nor closing. The trees that frame the narrow opening stand where they stood before, their shapes unmoved, their branches holding the same weight. Snow rests along every surface, smoothing edges that might otherwise define separation. What lies ahead does not reveal itself through motion. It exists through persistence, through the fact that it remains visible without altering. The body remains aligned within that space. It does not follow the distance. It does not reach toward it. It holds its position relative to it, as if the relationship between body and environment has already been decided and no further adjustment is necessary. The line of sight continues forward, unchanged, resting on a point that does not require confirmation. Breath continues to pass through the air, shaped to avoid leaving a trace. Each exhale is directed downward, into the snow that receives it without response. There is no visible vapor rising into the open space. No sign that breath has entered the air at all. The exchange remains contained, limited to what is necessary for the body to continue, without extending beyond it. You begin to notice how the air carries sound, not by moving it, but by holding it close. Nothing travels far here. The stillness absorbs rather than reflects. Even the smallest disturbance would remain local, contained within the immediate space around it. There is no echo, no continuation. Sound, if it occurs, would begin and end in the same place, unable to reach beyond the boundary of its origin. But there is no sound. The forest does not produce it. The snow does not shift. The body does not create it. What exists here remains within a range that does not require expression. Silence is not the absence of noise. It is the condition that replaces it entirely. The air rests against the surface of the snow, pressing lightly, evenly, without direction. It fills the shallow depressions, settles around the small rises, conforms to the shapes that the ground presents without altering them. It does not disturb. It does not interact. It exists alongside everything else, part of the same agreement that governs stillness. The longer this condition holds, the more complete it becomes. Nothing enters to interrupt it. Nothing leaves to reduce it. The air remains unchanged, holding its position as steadily as the body within it. There is no sense of waiting for movement. No expectation that something will pass through. Only the quiet continuation of what has already been established. The body does not respond to the air beyond what is necessary. It does not shift to escape the cold. It does not adjust to find comfort. It remains where it is, receiving each breath, releasing it again, maintaining the same measured rhythm without deviation. The relationship between body and air has been simplified to its smallest form, enough to sustain, nothing more. Time gathers within this stillness. It does not move forward through the air. It settles into it, becoming part of the same quiet density that fills the space between the trees. Each moment adds to what is already present, not by change, but by continuation. The air does not mark its passing. It holds it, and within that held stillness, the body remains, breathing, unmoving, aligned with a space that does not shift, within air that does not move, held inside a silence that does not break. As the morning settles further into itself, the air does not lighten. It remains as it was, carrying the same quiet density, unchanged by the passing of time. What alters is not the air, but the way the body continues within it. Breathing becomes less noticeable, not because it stops, but because it no longer demands attention. The rhythm stabilizes into something that does not need to be followed consciously. It continues on its own, shaped by repetition rather than decision. The cold within the air begins to define boundaries more clearly, not through movement, but through sensation that has shifted from sharpness to absence. The edges of the face, the fingertips, the areas where the body meets the open space, these are no longer points of discomfort. They become distant, less present, as if the connection between surface and awareness has been reduced. What remains is not pain, but a quiet detachment from the outermost layers of the body. The position holds without reinforcement. There is no active effort to remain still. The stillness has settled into place as something that sustains itself. Muscles no longer respond to the impulse to move, because the impulse itself has faded. What once required control now continues without it. The body has adjusted to the condition fully enough that no correction is necessary. The line of sight remains unchanged, but perception deepens. Details that once required attention now appear without effort. The same branches, the same interruptions in the snow, the same faint variations in shadow. All of it becomes familiar to the point where it no longer needs to be examined. The eyes do not search. They recognize. The environment has been seen often enough that it no longer presents itself as new. You begin to understand how the air participates in concealment. It does not hide the body directly, but it removes contrast. It softens edges, reduces clarity, prevents anything from standing apart too distinctly. The cold carries no scent, no trace that might travel. The stillness prevents movement that might reveal shape. Together, they create a condition where presence can exist without drawing attention to itself. Nothing enters this space. No sound crosses into it. No movement disturbs it. The boundary that surrounds this small section of forest remains intact, defined not by physical barriers, but by the absence of interruption. What exists here is contained, held within a quiet that does not extend outward, but also does not allow anything inward. The body continues to exist within that containment. Breath remains measured, passing through air that does not acknowledge it. The chest rises and falls with a consistency that does not change. There is no urgency in it, no variation that might suggest strain or anticipation. It is simply the continuation of a function that supports the condition without altering it. Time continues to gather. It does not move through the air. It settles into it, adding to the same quiet density that fills the space. There is no distinction between earlier and later, only the accumulation of moments that have passed without leaving a trace. The air does not record them. It holds them without marking them. The ground, the trees, the air, the body, all remain aligned. No element stands apart from the others. No part of this space introduces change. The condition is complete, sustained not by effort, but by the absence of anything that would require effort to respond to. The cold remains. The air remains. The stillness remains. And within that stillness, the body continues to breathe, to hold its position, to exist without movement in a space that does not shift around it. Nothing signals that this will end. Nothing suggests that it should. The shape of seeing. Sight does not begin with clarity here. It begins with uncertainty, with surfaces that offer too little contrast to separate one thing from another. The snow reflects light evenly, removing shadows that might define edges. The trees stand as vertical interruptions, but even they soften at a distance, their outlines blending into the pale air. What is seen is not immediately understood. It must be held in view long enough to become recognizable. The eyes remain fixed, not through strain, but through restraint. There is no scanning across the horizon, no movement to search for change. Instead, the gaze settles into a narrow field, returning to the same space repeatedly until that space becomes familiar. The act of seeing is reduced to observation without variation, allowing detail to emerge slowly rather than being sought out. The longer the gaze holds, the more the environment reveals what it contains, not through movement, but through consistency. A branch that remains in the same position, a slight depression in the snow that does not shift, a line that appears irregular at first, then resolves into something shaped by intention rather than chance. These details do not present themselves all at once. They become visible only after time has removed the expectation of change. The body does not follow the eyes. It remains aligned, still, separate from the act of seeing even as it depends on it. There is no adjustment to improve the view, no repositioning to refine the angle. The perspective has already been chosen, and it is held without reconsideration. What can be seen from here is enough, not because it reveals everything, but because it reveals what matters within this condition. You notice how the distance begins to divide itself, not into near and far, but into known and unknown. The space that has been observed long enough becomes stable, predictable, understood without needing to be examined again. Beyond that, the surface remains uncertain, holding shapes that have not yet resolved, forms that may be part of the landscape or may not. The boundary between the two is not fixed. It shifts slowly as attention extends outward. There is no urgency in this process. Nothing demands immediate recognition. Nothing requires a response. The act of seeing is not tied to action. It exists on its own, as a continuation of stillness rather than a departure from it. The eyes do not search for something to happen. They remain open to what already is. Light remains unchanged. It does not brighten enough to sharpen detail. It does not fade enough to obscure it further. It holds the environment in a state where everything is visible, but nothing stands out. This balance prevents quick recognition. It requires time. It requires patience. It rewards repetition rather than reaction. The line of sight remains steady. It does not wander. It does not adjust. It returns again and again to the same narrow opening between the trees, allowing that space to define itself fully. Over time, the smallest variations within it become apparent. A shift in the surface of the snow, a line that was not there before, a form that begins to separate itself from the background. But nothing confirms itself immediately. Everything remains within the possibility of being something or nothing at all. The eyes do not decide. They wait. They hold the image without interpreting it too quickly, allowing it to settle into recognition only when it has remained consistent long enough to be trusted. What is seen must prove itself through time, not through sudden clarity. The body remains still beneath this act of seeing. It does not react to what might be present. It does not prepare for movement. It continues to hold its position, aligned with the ground, breathing quietly into the snow, maintaining the same condition that allows the eyes to observe without interference. Time continues to gather within the act of looking. Moments layer over one another, each adding to the familiarity of the space. The longer the gaze holds, the more the unknown becomes known, not through discovery, but through repetition. What was uncertain becomes stable, not because it changes, but because it remains. And within that stability, the eyes continue to rest on the same narrow field, unmoving, unhurried, waiting for the environment to reveal itself, one detail at a time, without ever asking it to do so. The longer the gaze remains, the less it searches for difference. What once required attention begins to settle into recognition without effort. The surface of the snow, which at first appeared uniform, now holds subtle variations that no longer need to be questioned. Small irregularities resolve into familiar forms. Shadows, though faint, begin to carry meaning through repetition. The environment does not change, but the act of seeing it becomes more precise, more restrained. There is a point where observation stops asking what is there and begins to understand what is not. Absence becomes as important as presence. A line that should continue but does not. A shape that interrupts the expected pattern of the ground. A space where nothing moves, not because nothing exists there, but because what exists has already chosen stillness. These are not discoveries. They are recognitions, formed slowly through the accumulation of time. The eyes do not fixate on a single detail for long. They return to the same field again and again, allowing the entire space to settle into memory rather than isolating any one element. Nothing is followed. Nothing is tracked. The act of seeing remains wide, even within its narrow boundary, holding everything in equal consideration without assigning importance too quickly. The body continues to remain separate from this process. It does not lean forward. It does not adjust to refine the view. The alignment holds, unchanged, as if the perspective itself has become part of the environment. Seeing does not require movement. It requires only the continuation of what has already been established. You begin to notice how time shapes perception. The longer something remains unchanged, the more certain it becomes. What was once uncertain gains weight through persistence. A form that holds its position across many moments begins to separate itself from the background, not through movement, but through the absence of it. Stillness becomes its own kind of confirmation. Light continues to rest evenly across the ground. It does not favor one surface over another. It does not create contrast that would reveal edges more clearly. This evenness removes shortcuts. It prevents immediate recognition. It requires the eye to work slowly, to accept that clarity will not arrive all at once. Nothing draws attention to itself. No movement signals importance. No sound directs the gaze. The environment offers no guidance beyond what is already present. It does not assist the act of seeing. It remains neutral, allowing only what can be observed over time to become visible. The line between what is part of the landscape and what is not remains thin. It is not crossed quickly. It is approached gradually, through repeated observation that reduces uncertainty one moment at a time. What begins as a possibility becomes a likelihood, then a quiet certainty, but only after it has remained unchanged long enough to be trusted. The eyes do not rush this process. They hold the image, return to it, allow it to confirm itself without interference. There is no need to decide quickly, no pressure to interpret, only the continuation of observation, extended across time that does not demand resolution. The body remains still beneath this steady gaze. Breath continues, quiet and controlled, absorbed into the snow without trace. The hands remain where they have been, holding without tension, aligned with a direction that does not change. Nothing in the body responds to what is seen. It maintains the same condition, allowing perception to exist without disruption. Time continues to gather within the act of seeing. Each moment adds to the last, reinforcing what has already been observed. The environment does not shift. It does not introduce new elements. It allows only the deepening of what is already present. And within that deepening, the gaze remains steady, unmoving, resting on a space that reveals itself slowly, not through change, but through the quiet persistence of remaining the same. The body that remains. The body does not begin as stillness. It arrives there slowly, through a series of movements that have already ended before this moment begins. Each position once required adjustment. Each contact with the ground once carried weight that needed to be placed carefully. But those movements no longer exist here. What remains is the result, a form that has settled into alignment with the surface beneath it, no longer shifting, no longer seeking a better position. The ground receives that weight without response. It does not soften. It does not give way. It remains as it was, holding the body in place not through comfort, but through consistency. Pressure builds where contact is strongest, along the elbows, the knees, the chest pressed lightly into the snow, but that pressure is not resisted. It becomes part of the condition, something that is acknowledged without requiring change. The cold continues its quiet movement inward. It no longer feels like an external force. It has moved beyond the surface, beyond the initial contact with skin and fabric, settling into the deeper spaces where sensation becomes less immediate. What remains is not the sharp awareness of cold, but a kind of distance from warmth, as if the body has adjusted its expectations rather than its environment. The position holds because it has been accepted. There is no ongoing effort to maintain it. Muscles do not strain to remain still. They have found a state where stillness is less demanding than movement would be. Any impulse to shift has already been considered and set aside. What remains is not resistance, but absence, the absence of anything that would require change. The hands rest where they have been placed. They do not grip tightly. They do not loosen. The contact remains constant, shaped by familiarity rather than control. Over time, the distinction between holding and resting fades. The object they touch does not feel separate. It remains where it is, supported without effort, aligned with the body in a way that does not need to be reinforced. Breath continues, quiet and measured. It does not rise above the condition. It remains within it, shaped to avoid disturbance, directed downward into the snow where it disappears without trace. There is no variation in its rhythm, no sign of urgency or fatigue. It continues because it must, not because it is noticed. You observe how the body becomes less defined over time, not through movement, but through the way it merges with what surrounds it. Snow settles along its edges, softening its outline. The surface around it remains undisturbed, allowing the form to blend into the ground rather than stand apart from it. What was once clearly a body becomes less distinct, less separate, part of the same quiet pattern that covers everything else. There is no attempt to preserve identity within this space. The body does not need to be recognized. It does not need to be seen. Its function does not depend on visibility. In fact, visibility would disrupt the condition that allows it to remain. What matters is not how it appears, but how little it appears at all. Time continues to gather within this stillness. It does not move through the body. It settles into it, reinforcing the position, deepening the acceptance of what has already been established. The longer the body remains, the more complete the stillness becomes, not through effort, but through the absence of interruption. The forest does not respond. It remains as it was, unchanged by the presence within it. Trees hold their position. Snow rests where it has fallen. Air remains still. Nothing acknowledges the body, and the body does not seek acknowledgement. The condition is mutual. The environment allows stillness. The body accepts it. And within that agreement, the form remains aligned with the ground, held in place by a quiet that does not need to be maintained, only continued. As time continues to settle, the body becomes less something that is held and more something that is left, not abandoned, but placed into a condition where intention no longer needs to be expressed through movement. What was once guided by small decisions, where to rest the weight, how to angle the shoulders, how to distribute pressure, now continues without instruction. The position sustains itself, not because it is perfect, but because it no longer requires correction. The cold deepens into stillness within the body. Sensation narrows, withdrawing from the outermost edges and settling closer to the center. The hands remain where they are, but their contact with what they hold becomes less immediate, as if distance has formed between surface and awareness. The face, close to the snow, no longer reacts to the air that rests against it. What was once felt directly now exists as a quiet absence of warmth rather than an active sensation. The ground continues to carry the weight without change. It does not respond to time. It does not adapt to pressure. It remains constant, allowing the body to adapt instead. Small discomforts that once required attention no longer rise to the level of action. They are included in the condition, part of the quiet agreement that stillness requires acceptance rather than adjustment. There is no effort to maintain readiness. Readiness is not held in tension, but in the absence of disturbance. The body does not prepare for movement. It avoids it. The muscles remain in a state that allows continuation rather than reaction, conserving not energy in the sense of movement, but the absence of movement itself. Breath remains controlled, not through focus, but through repetition. It continues in the same measured pattern, directed downward, absorbed before it can mark the air. There is no visible sign of its passage, no indication that it changes with time. It remains consistent, part of the larger stillness rather than separate from it. You begin to notice how the body disappears not by becoming invisible, but by becoming expected. It belongs to the environment in a way that does not draw attention. It does not interrupt the surface. It does not alter the pattern of the ground. What is present remains present, but without contrast, without distinction that would separate it from what surrounds it. Nothing here suggests interruption. No movement breaks the line of the trees. No sound crosses the air. The surface of the snow remains undisturbed beyond what has already been shaped into place. The condition continues without variation, holding everything within it in the same quiet balance. Time continues to gather. It does not pass through the body. It settles into it, reinforcing the stillness, deepening the distance between impulse and action. The longer the body remains, the less it feels like something that could move at all. Movement becomes not impossible, but unnecessary, something outside the condition that has already been accepted. The environment remains unchanged. Light holds steady. Air does not move. The trees do not shift. What exists now is the same as what existed before, extended through time that does not introduce difference. The body remains within that extension, not active, not reactive, simply present, held in place by a condition that has removed the need for anything beyond continuation. And within that continuation, nothing asks to be altered. Nothing requires it. The first break in pattern. For a long time, nothing distinguishes one moment from the next. The surface of the snow holds its quiet continuity. The trees remain fixed in their lines. The air rests without movement. What has been observed continues without interruption, reinforcing the sense that the environment exists outside of change, or at least beyond the kind of change that can be noticed easily. The eye settles into this repetition, no longer expecting variation, no longer searching for it. Then something does not align. It is not movement at first. It is not sound. It is a difference so small that it does not announce itself as anything unusual. A line that does not follow the pattern of the ground. A shape that interrupts the evenness of the snow, not by rising above it, but by failing to match it exactly. It does not appear suddenly. It becomes visible only because it remains where it should not be. The gaze returns to it, not with urgency, but with the same patience that has defined everything else. The eyes do not fix on it immediately. They pass over it, then return again, allowing the detail to settle into recognition through repetition. It remains. It does not resolve into certainty yet, but it no longer disappears into the background as it did before. Distance holds it in place. There is no change in its position, no shift that would confirm it as something separate from the landscape. It exists within the same stillness, subject to the same conditions. But its presence begins to carry weight, not because it moves, but because it does not conform. The body does not respond. It remains aligned with the ground, breath steady, position unchanged. Nothing in its posture suggests that anything has altered in the environment. The condition holds, uninterrupted from the outside, even as perception begins to adjust within it. You notice how uncertainty begins to narrow. The shape, once indistinct, now holds its place within the field of vision more firmly. It does not dissolve when the gaze shifts slightly. It does not blend back into the surface when attention softens. It remains, carrying with it the possibility of being something more than part of the ground. There is still no movement, no signal that confirms its nature, no sound that accompanies it. The air remains still. The snow does not shift around it. Everything continues as before, except for this small interruption in pattern that refuses to return to the background. Time gathers around it. Moments pass, each one allowing the shape to remain where it is. With each repetition, the likelihood of it being part of the environment decreases, not through evidence, but through persistence. What does not change becomes something that must be understood, even if it does not yet reveal itself completely. The eyes continue to return to it, not quickly, not continuously, but often enough that it becomes a fixed point within the field of vision, something that is now included in the environment rather than dismissed. It does not dominate the space. It does not draw attention forcefully. It exists quietly, but with a presence that grows through time. The body remains still beneath this shift in perception. No adjustment follows. No movement signals recognition. The position continues unchanged, maintaining the same alignment with the ground, the same controlled breath, the same quiet integration with the environment. Nothing in the physical condition reflects what has begun to alter in the act of seeing. The forest remains silent. The air remains still. The snow holds its surface without disturbance. And within that unchanged environment, A single detail continues to exist where it did not before, not by appearing suddenly, but by remaining long enough to be noticed. The shape does not confirm itself through motion. It remains where it is, held within the same stillness that governs everything else. What changes is not the object, but the certainty around it. With each return of the gaze, the difference becomes less uncertain, less easy to dismiss. It begins to separate itself from the surface, not by rising above it, but by refusing to disappear into it. The eyes do not move closer. Distance remains fixed. There is no attempt to narrow the space between observer and object. Instead, the object is allowed to remain where it is, held within the same field of vision that has already been studied and understood. It becomes part of that field, but not part of its pattern. Time continues to gather. The shape remains through one moment, then another still. Each passing interval reinforces its presence, not through change, but through the absence of it. What might have been dismissed as a trick of light or surface begins to hold its place with quiet insistence. There is still no sound. The air does not carry anything from that distance. The snow remains undisturbed around it. Nothing travels across the space to confirm or deny what is being seen. The silence continues, complete and unbroken, offering no assistance to interpretation. The body remains unchanged. It does not react to the growing certainty. Breath continues in the same measured rhythm, directed downward, absorbed into the snow. Hands remain where they have been, resting without tension. The alignment with the ground does not shift. Whatever is being observed does not alter the condition of stillness. You begin to understand how recognition forms without urgency. It does not arrive as a sudden realization. It builds slowly, layer by layer, as each moment confirms what the previous one suggested. The shape becomes something that cannot be ignored, not because it demands attention, but because it continues to exist without explanation. The line between possibility and certainty narrows. What was once uncertain now carries weight. It occupies space within the mind as something that must be accounted for, even if it does not yet reveal its full nature. It is no longer part of the background. It has become an element within the environment that holds its own place. The gaze returns again. It does not linger longer than before. It does not focus more intensely. It simply continues the same pattern of observation, allowing the object to remain within it, to confirm itself through persistence rather than through action. The forest remains unchanged. Trees hold their positions. Snow rests along every surface. Light continues to fall evenly, offering no contrast that would clarify the shape more quickly. The environment does not assist in recognition. It remains neutral, allowing only time to reveal what is present. The body continues to hold stillness. No movement follows the recognition. No shift in posture marks the moment where uncertainty becomes certainty. The condition remains intact, unaffected by what has been seen. And within that condition, the shape remains. Not moving, not revealing, only existing long enough to become known. The act without movement. Recognition does not lead to immediate action. It settles first, becoming part of the same quiet structure that has held everything else in place. The shape, now no longer uncertain, exists within the field of vision as something defined, but not yet engaged. It remains where it is, unchanged, held at a distance that has already been measured without needing to be calculated again. The body does not respond with movement. It remains aligned with the ground, unchanged in posture, unchanged in breath. There is no visible preparation, no adjustment of position. The condition of stillness holds, even as the space within it begins to narrow toward a single point. The line of sight does not shift. It has already been established. The direction has already been chosen. What was once a field of observation becomes more focused, but without any outward sign of that change. The eyes do not move differently. They simply remain, holding the same alignment, allowing the distance to resolve into something precise. The hands do not tighten. They remain where they have been, resting without tension, holding without effort. The contact between skin and wood does not change in any visible way. There is no sudden readiness, no sign that anything is about to occur. The position continues as it has, uninterrupted, steady. Breath becomes smaller, not faster, not deeper, smaller. It reduces itself to the minimum required, each inhale and exhale contained within a range that does not disturb the air. The movement of the chest becomes less noticeable, less defined, as if the body is removing even the smallest variations that might exist. You observe how the environment remains unchanged. The trees do not react. The snow does not shift. The air continues to rest in place, carrying no sound, no movement. What has altered exists only within the act of seeing, not within the world being observed. The distance holds steady. Nothing moves within it. The shape remains where it has been, no closer, no further, no clearer than before. It exists within the same quiet space, subject to the same stillness, offering no signal beyond its continued presence. Time continues to gather. It does not accelerate. It does not slow. It remains consistent, extending outward through moments that do not demand resolution. The longer the condition holds, the more complete it becomes, reinforcing the absence of movement as the dominant state. The body remains within that state. There is no visible transition from observation to action, no boundary that separates one from the other. What occurs next does not emerge from movement, but from continuation, from the fact that nothing has changed. The forest remains silent. The air remains still. The snow continues to hold its surface without disturbance. And within that unchanged environment, something begins to occur that does not require movement to exist. The moment does not announce itself. There is no shift in posture, no visible change in the alignment of the body. The hands remain as they were. The breath continues in its reduced rhythm. The line of sight holds steady. What occurs is contained entirely within a space too small to be seen from a distance, a transition that does not disturb the larger stillness that surrounds it. A subtle tightening passes through the hands, not enough to alter their position, not enough to create movement beyond what is necessary. It is a change that exists within the contact itself, a slight increase in pressure that does not extend beyond the point where it is held. The rest of the body does not follow. It remains still, unaffected by what has begun. The breath pauses, but only briefly, not as a break in rhythm, but as a narrowing of it, a moment where even the smallest movement is reduced further. The air remains undisturbed. No trace escapes into the open space. The pause exists within the body, contained, unnoticed by anything beyond it. The line of sight does not shift. It has already settled into its position, already aligned with what has been observed. There is no correction, no adjustment. What has been seen is held exactly as it is, without modification. Then, within that stillness, the act completes. It does not echo. It does not carry. It exists as a brief interruption that does not extend beyond its origin. The air absorbs it immediately, preventing it from traveling, containing it within a space too small to alter the environment in any visible way. Nothing around it reacts. The trees remain still. The snow does not shift. The distance holds its position without change. What has occurred does not disturb the larger condition. It exists within it, then settles back into it without leaving a trace that can be seen from here. The body remains in place. There is no immediate movement that follows. No release of tension that would signal completion. The hands return to their previous state without transition. The breath resumes its quiet rhythm, unchanged in pattern. The alignment with the ground continues as before. You observe how the moment does not separate itself from what came before it. It does not stand apart as something distinct. It folds back into the same stillness that has defined everything here, becoming part of the continuous condition rather than an interruption of it. The distance remains. What was present before remains present now, though altered in a way that is not immediately visible. The shape that held its position no longer carries the same uncertainty, but that change does not reveal itself through motion. It remains within the same space, now absorbed into the stillness in a different way. Time continues to gather. It does not mark the moment that has passed. It does not separate it from what follows. It continues as it has, extending outward through a sequence of moments that do not require distinction. The forest remains silent. The air does not move. The snow holds its surface without disturbance. And within that unchanged environment, the act has already passed, leaving nothing behind but the continuation of stillness, as complete and unbroken as it was before. The return to repetition. What follows does not feel like continuation of an event. It feels like a return to something that never truly paused. The stillness remains intact, unbroken in any visible way. The body does not rise from the ground. It does not acknowledge what has occurred through movement or change in posture. It remains where it has been, aligned with the same surface, held within the same quiet agreement that has governed every moment so far. The hands settle back into their familiar rest. Whatever slight tightening passed through them has already dissolved, leaving no trace behind. The contact returns to what it was before, steady, unforced, shaped by repetition rather than intention. There is no lingering tension, no sign that anything different has taken place. Breath resumes its quiet rhythm. It does not deepen. It does not accelerate. It continues as if uninterrupted, moving in and out of the body with the same measured consistency, directed downward, absorbed into the snow without trace. The pause that occurred does not extend beyond the moment that contained it. The line of sight remains unchanged. It does not move away from the distance that has been held for so long. The gaze does not search for confirmation. It does not follow what might have shifted. It remains where it is, returning immediately to the same pattern of observation, as if nothing has altered that would require a different approach. You begin to notice how the act does not carry weight beyond itself. It does not expand into consequence within this space. It does not create a sequence of reactions. It exists as a single point within a larger condition that continues without acknowledging it. The environment does not respond. The body does not respond. Everything returns to what it was, without needing to be restored. The forest remains unchanged. Trees hold their positions. Snow rests along every surface. The air continues to sit motionless between them, carrying no sound, no movement. There is no disturbance that travels outward, no signal that moves beyond the moment where it began. Time continues to gather. It does not pause to mark what has happened. It does not separate the moment from what follows. It extends outward as it has before, adding to the same quiet accumulation that defines this space. The body remains aligned with the ground. There is no shift in weight, no adjustment of position. The same contact points remain, the same distribution of pressure, the same acceptance of what cannot be changed without breaking the condition. What was established before continues without interruption. The eyes return to their pattern. They do not linger on what has changed. They do not confirm it. They move across the same narrow field, allowing the environment to settle once more into familiarity. What has been seen becomes part of what is known, but it does not dominate the act of seeing. Repetition resumes fully. The cycle returns, not as something restarted, but as something that was never interrupted at all. The act that occurred does not stand apart from the condition. It belongs to it, as natural and unremarkable as the breath that continues, as the stillness that holds everything in place. The cold remains. The air remains. The ground continues to carry the body without response. And within that unchanged environment, the condition of waiting settles back into place, as complete as it was before, requiring nothing new, nothing different, only the continuation of what has already been accepted. The cycle does not restart. It reveals that it never ended. What appeared as a moment now dissolves into a pattern that continues without distinction. The body remains in place, unchanged in posture, unchanged in breath. Nothing in its condition suggests completion. There is no release, no transition into rest. What exists now is the same as what existed before, extended through time that does not recognize interruption. The hands continue their quiet contact. They do not adjust their hold. They do not seek a new position. The familiarity of placement remains intact, shaped by repetition that has removed the need for conscious correction. The object they support does not feel separate. It rests where it has always been, aligned without effort. Breath maintains its narrow rhythm. It does not expand to recover. It does not change to reflect what has occurred. It continues within the same controlled range, directed downward, absorbed into the snow before it can leave a trace. The body does not signal that anything has passed through it that would require adjustment. The line of sight remains fixed. The gaze does not shift to confirm absence. It does not follow any change within the distance. It returns to the same field, allowing the environment to settle once more into familiarity. What has been altered does not demand attention. It becomes part of the known space without requiring acknowledgement. You begin to understand how repetition removes distinction. When the same condition holds long enough, individual moments lose their edges. They no longer stand apart as separate events. They merge into a continuous presence, where what happens does not interrupt what is. The cycle does not progress. It persists. The forest remains silent. No sound travels across the snow. No movement passes between the trees. The air holds everything in place, preventing anything from carrying beyond its origin. What exists here remains contained, unaffected by what occurs within it. The ground continues to hold. It does not register the passage of time. It does not respond to what rests upon it. It remains constant, allowing the body to continue without needing to adapt. The relationship between surface and form remains unchanged, defined by stillness rather than interaction. Time continues to gather. It does not separate moments into before and after. It accumulates, layering one upon another without distinction. What has occurred becomes part of what is, not something that stands apart from it. The condition deepens, not through change, but through continuation. The body remains within that condition. There is no shift toward movement. No indication that the position will be altered. The alignment holds, supported by the absence of any reason to change it. What exists now is enough to continue, and continuation is all that is required. The eyes return again to the same space. They observe without searching, without expectation. The environment reveals itself only through persistence, and the gaze remains patient enough to allow it. Nothing demands to be seen. Nothing requires interpretation beyond what has already been understood. The cycle continues, not as something renewed, but as something uninterrupted. The cold remains. The air remains. The stillness holds everything in place. And within that stillness, the body continues to wait, not for what comes next, but within a condition that does not depend on what comes at all. The pressure that returns. The stillness does not remain untouched. It begins to carry a weight that was not present before, though nothing within the immediate space appears to have changed. The trees hold their positions. The snow lies undisturbed. The air remains motionless, resting between the trunks as it has throughout the morning. Yet within that sameness, a different quality settles, not visible, not audible, but present. Distance no longer feels empty. What lies beyond the narrow field of vision begins to hold possibility in a way it did not before. The space between the trees, once defined only by stillness, now carries the suggestion of attention from elsewhere. It is not seen. It is not confirmed. But it exists as a condition that begins to shape perception. The gaze does not widen. It remains fixed, aligned with the same opening, returning again and again to what has already been observed. But within that repetition, a subtle shift occurs. What was once a space to observe becomes a space that might also observe in return. The direction remains the same, but the meaning of that direction begins to deepen. The body does not respond. It remains aligned with the ground, unchanged in posture, unchanged in breath. The condition of stillness continues, held without adjustment. Nothing in the physical form reflects the change that has begun to settle within perception. The air remains still, but it no longer feels neutral. It holds the space more tightly, as if carrying something unseen within it. There is no movement to confirm this, no sound to accompany it. Yet the absence of both begins to feel less complete, less final, as if the silence now contains more than it reveals. You notice how the environment begins to hold tension without movement. Not the sharp tension of immediate change, but a quiet pressure that builds through the possibility of interruption. The forest remains unchanged, but it no longer feels closed. It opens outward, beyond what can be seen, into distances that now carry uncertainty rather than absence. Time continues to gather. It does not accelerate. It does not signal urgency. But the way it settles begins to feel different. Each moment adds not only to the continuation of stillness, but to the sense that stillness is no longer the only condition that exists within this space. The line of sight remains steady. It does not search for confirmation of what cannot be seen. It returns to the same field, allowing it to hold whatever it now contains without forcing clarity. What lies beyond remains undefined, but it no longer feels empty. The body continues to remain within its established state. Breath stays controlled, directed downward, absorbed into the snow. Hands rest without tension. Muscles hold their position without effort. Nothing in the body acknowledges the shift in the environment. The ground remains unchanged. It carries the weight without response, as it has from the beginning. It does not register the presence of anything beyond what rests upon it. Its role remains constant, unaffected by what may exist beyond its immediate surface. The forest remains silent. No sound crosses the air. No movement passes between the trees. Yet the silence itself begins to feel different, not broken but layered, as if it now contains something that has not yet revealed itself. And within that layered stillness, the body remains unmoving, unresponsive, held within a condition that has not changed, even as the space around it begins to feel as though it might. The change does not arrive from within the immediate field of vision. It comes from beyond it, from distances that remain unseen but no longer feel absent. The narrow opening between the trees continues to hold the same shapes, the same lines of snow and shadow, yet what lies outside that frame begins to press inward, not through movement, but through presence that has not yet taken form. The gaze does not follow this pressure outward. It remains where it has always been, returning to the same space, holding the same alignment. There is no attempt to widen perception beyond what can be observed directly. Instead, the unknown is allowed to exist without being pursued, held at the edge of awareness rather than brought into focus. The body remains unchanged. No tension rises through the shoulders. No shift alters the position. Breath continues in the same controlled rhythm, directed downward, absorbed before it can enter the open air. The condition of stillness holds, uninterrupted by what cannot yet be seen. The air continues to rest in place, but it no longer feels empty. It carries a density that was not present before, a quiet weight that settles between the trees without moving through them. There is no wind to explain it, no sound to confirm it. Yet it remains, altering the way space is perceived without altering the space itself. You begin to notice how the environment now contains more than it reveals. The forest does not show what lies beyond the visible. It does not offer signs that would clarify the presence that has begun to settle into it. Instead, it holds that presence within the same stillness, allowing it to exist without definition. Time continues to gather. Each moment extends the condition, adding to the sense that something exists beyond what can be observed directly. The longer the stillness holds, the more complete this sense becomes, not through evidence, but through persistence. The line of sight remains fixed. It does not adjust to seek confirmation. It returns again and again to the same field, allowing what is visible to remain unchanged. The unseen does not draw the gaze away. It remains outside it, influencing perception without entering it. The ground continues to hold everything in place. It does not respond to the shift in the environment. It carries the same weight, supports the same position, remains constant beneath what rests upon it. Its role does not change, even as the space above it begins to feel altered. The forest remains silent. No sound crosses the air. No movement breaks the surface of the snow. Yet the silence itself now carries depth, as if it contains something that has not yet emerged, something that exists within it without revealing itself. The body remains within the same condition, still, unmoving, unaware in its physical form of what has begun to change beyond it. And within that unchanged posture, the pressure continues to exist, not as an event, not as a movement, but as a quiet presence that settles into the space without ever needing to announce itself. The edge of detection. The pressure does not remain abstract. Over time, it begins to take form, not through movement that can be clearly seen, but through small inconsistencies that no longer align with the known pattern of the environment. The forest remains still, but within that stillness, something begins to fail to match what has already been learned through repetition. At first, it is subtle, a faint irregularity along the line of distant trees, a surface that reflects light slightly differently than the snow around it. These details do not announce themselves. They appear only because they persist long enough to be noticed, long enough to resist being absorbed into the background as everything else has been. The gaze returns to them, not with urgency, not with focus that breaks the rhythm of observation, but with the same quiet repetition that has defined every moment before this. The eyes pass over the space, then return again, allowing the detail to remain within the field of vision until it begins to carry weight. Distance holds its place. Nothing moves within it. No shape shifts to confirm what it is. The irregularity remains where it has been, held within the same stillness that has concealed everything else. But its presence begins to narrow the space between uncertainty and recognition. The body does not respond. It remains aligned with the ground, unchanged in posture, unchanged in breath. The condition of stillness holds, even as the act of seeing begins to adjust to what is now present within the environment. You begin to understand how detection forms slowly. It does not arrive through sudden clarity. It builds through repetition, through the continued existence of something that does not conform to what has already been established. What remains in place long enough becomes something that must be accounted for, even if it does not reveal itself fully. The air remains still. No sound travels from the distance. No movement carries across the snow. The silence continues, offering no assistance to interpretation, no confirmation of what might be present. Everything that is known must come from what is seen, and what is seen remains incomplete. The line of sight remains steady. It does not narrow further. It does not shift to isolate the irregularity. It holds the entire field, allowing the detail to exist within it without being separated from its surroundings. Recognition does not require focus. It requires time. Time continues to gather. Each moment allows the irregularity to remain where it is. Each repetition reinforces its presence, reducing the possibility that it belongs to the natural pattern of the environment. What was once uncertain begins to hold its place more firmly. The forest remains unchanged. Trees do not move. Snow does not shift. Light continues to fall evenly, offering no contrast that would clarify the shape more quickly. The environment does not assist. It remains neutral, requiring observation to do the work of recognition. The body continues to hold stillness. No movement follows the growing certainty. No adjustment signals awareness. The condition remains intact, unaffected by what is being seen. And within that condition, the irregularity continues to exist, not revealing itself, not confirming its nature, only remaining long enough to begin to be known. The irregularity does not clarify all at once. It remains within the same narrow space, held at a distance that does not change, offering no movement that would resolve it quickly. What shifts instead is the weight it carries within perception. With each return of the gaze, it becomes less something that might be dismissed and more something that must be considered. The eyes do not isolate it. They continue to move across the same field, allowing the irregularity to remain within the broader pattern rather than separating it from it. This prevents it from becoming something immediate, something that demands reaction. It remains part of the environment, even as it begins to stand apart from it. Time continues to gather. Moments pass without alteration. The irregularity remains where it is, unchanged, held within the same stillness that has defined everything else. Each passing interval reduces uncertainty, not by revealing more, but by confirming that what is seen does not belong to chance. The air remains silent. No sound travels from the distance. No movement disturbs the surface of the snow. The space between observer and irregularity remains empty of anything that would confirm what lies within it. The silence continues, complete and unbroken. The body remains unchanged. No tension rises through the muscles. No shift alters the alignment. Breath continues in the same measured rhythm, directed downward, absorbed before it can leave a trace. Nothing in the physical form reflects the change that has begun within perception. You begin to understand how certainty forms without resolution. It does not arrive as a conclusion. It settles slowly, as the absence of doubt rather than the presence of proof. The irregularity becomes something that is known to be separate from the environment, even if its exact nature remains undefined. The line of sight remains steady. It does not narrow further. It does not search for confirmation beyond what is already visible. It returns again and again to the same space, allowing recognition to deepen without forcing clarity. The forest remains unchanged. Trees hold their positions. Snow rests along every surface. Light continues to fall evenly, offering no contrast that would reveal more than what has already been seen. The environment remains neutral, unchanged by what exists within it. The ground continues to hold. It supports the body without response, as it has from the beginning. It remains constant, unaffected by what is observed above it. Its role does not change, even as the space beyond it begins to carry new meaning. Time continues to gather. It does not separate this moment from the ones before it. It accumulates, reinforcing the presence of the irregularity, deepening the certainty that something exists within the distance that does not belong to the pattern of the landscape. The body remains within the same condition, still, unmoving, unresponsive to what has begun to form within the act of seeing. And within that stillness, the irregularity holds its place, no longer uncertain, no longer part of the background, but not yet fully revealed. The return of sound. For a long time, silence has not been the absence of sound. It has been its replacement. The forest has held it completely, absorbing anything that might have disturbed it, preventing sound from forming, from traveling, from existing beyond the smallest possible space. What has been heard so far has been limited to what remains within the body, the quiet rhythm of breath, the faint presence of contact between surface and form, the internal continuity of being. Then, without warning, something enters the air. It does not arrive as a clear sound. It begins as a disturbance too faint to be named, a slight interruption in the density of silence that has defined everything up to this point. It is not directional. It does not carry far. It exists briefly, then settles, leaving behind no immediate confirmation of what it was. The body does not respond. It remains aligned with the ground, unchanged in posture, unchanged in breath. The condition of stillness holds, even as the air begins to carry something it has not carried before. The disturbance comes again, slightly more defined, but still contained. It does not travel across the forest in a way that reveals its origin. It remains close to where it occurs, absorbed quickly, leaving only a trace within perception that something has passed through the silence. The air does not move, but it begins to hold more. What was once empty now carries fragments, small interruptions that do not connect to one another, do not form a pattern yet. They exist independently, appearing and disappearing without establishing continuity. You begin to notice how sound returns slowly. It does not break the silence all at once. It enters in fragments, each one contained within a space too small to disturb the larger stillness. The forest remains quiet, but no longer completely sealed. Something has begun to pass through it. The line of sight remains steady. It does not follow the sound. It does not shift toward it. The gaze continues to hold the same field, allowing the auditory disturbance to exist separately from what is seen. The two do not align yet. They remain disconnected. The irregularity within the distance remains, unchanged, unmoving. It holds its place within the field of vision, unaffected by what has begun to enter the air. The connection between what is seen and what is heard has not yet formed. Time continues to gather. Each moment adds another fragment, another small interruption that does not yet define itself. The longer this continues, the more the silence begins to change, not by disappearing, but by allowing something else to exist within it. The body remains still. No adjustment follows the sound. No tension rises. Breath continues in its controlled rhythm, directed downward, absorbed into the snow. The physical condition does not reflect the shift that is beginning to take place in the environment. The forest remains largely unchanged. Trees do not move. Snow does not shift. Light continues to fall evenly, unaffected by what now passes through the air. The environment holds its form, even as the space within it begins to carry more than stillness alone. And within that space, sound continues to return. Not fully, not continuously, but enough to begin altering the silence that once held everything in place. The fragments begin to gather, though they do not form a continuous line. They remain separated by distance and by time, each one contained within its own brief existence. A faint crack carried low across the snow, a dull report that does not echo, absorbed before it can travel. The sounds do not move through the forest as a wave. They appear, then vanish, leaving the silence to close around them as if nothing had passed through at all. The air does not change its stillness. It does not carry these sounds far enough to define direction clearly. What reaches this space arrives softened, reduced, stripped of the sharp edges that might reveal its origin. The distance remains uncertain. The source remains undefined. What is heard is only the fact that something has begun. The body does not respond. No shift alters the position. No movement follows the sound. Breath continues in its narrow rhythm, unchanged in pace or depth. The stillness holds, even as the air now carries more than it did before. The line of sight remains fixed. The gaze does not follow the direction of the sound. It returns to the same narrow opening between the trees, holding the same alignment. What is seen remains unchanged. The irregularity still holds its place, unmoving, unaffected by what has begun to pass through the air. You begin to understand how sound alters space without altering form. The forest remains as it was, yet it no longer feels closed. The presence of sound, even in fragments, extends the environment beyond what can be seen. It suggests movement elsewhere, action beyond the visible, a continuation of something that does not enter this space fully, but still exists within it. The silence remains, but it is no longer complete. It now contains interruption, held within it rather than replacing it. Each sound passes through without breaking the larger stillness, yet each one leaves behind a subtle change, a shift in how the space is perceived. Time continues to gather. The intervals between sounds shorten, though not enough to form continuity. Each moment carries the possibility of another, and that possibility begins to shape the way time is experienced. It no longer feels entirely empty. It holds anticipation, though that anticipation does not lead to movement. The body remains within the same condition, still, unmoving, unaffected in posture or breath by what is now present in the air. The ground continues to hold everything in place. It does not respond to the sound. It does not carry it. It remains constant, supporting the body without change, unaffected by what passes above it. The forest remains visually unchanged. Trees stand as they have stood. Snow lies undisturbed. Light continues to fall evenly, offering no indication that anything beyond the visible has shifted. And yet the space is no longer the same. Sound has entered it. Not fully, not continuously, but enough to suggest that what exists beyond the visible field is no longer distant in the same way. It has moved closer, not in form, but in presence. The collapse of distance. Distance no longer holds its quiet separation. What once existed beyond the narrow field of vision begins to press inward, not through visible movement, but through the accumulation of sound that no longer feels distant. The fragments that entered the air before begin to gather more closely together. They remain separated, but the space between them narrows, creating a sense that what lies beyond is no longer as far removed as it once seemed. The forest does not change its form. Trees remain still. Snow lies undisturbed. Light continues to fall evenly across every surface. Nothing within the visible environment reflects what has begun to shift. The change exists within the way space is felt, not in how it appears. The line of sight remains fixed. It does not widen to search for the source. It does not shift to follow the direction of the sound. The gaze continues to return to the same narrow opening, holding the same alignment, allowing what is visible to remain unchanged even as what lies beyond it begins to move closer in presence. The irregularity within the distance remains. It does not move. It does not reveal itself further. It holds its position within the field of vision, unaffected by the growing presence of sound. What has been recognized continues to exist, unchanged, within a space that now carries more than stillness alone. The body remains aligned with the ground. No movement follows the change in the environment. No tension rises through the muscles. Breath continues in its controlled rhythm, directed downward, absorbed into the snow. The condition of stillness holds, even as the space around it begins to feel less contained. You begin to notice how the boundary between near and far begins to dissolve. What was once distant no longer feels separate. The sounds that enter the air no longer seem to originate from beyond reach. They begin to occupy the same space, not physically, but perceptually, reducing the sense of distance without altering the actual separation. The air continues to hold everything in place. It does not move. It does not carry the sound in a clear direction. Yet it allows more of it to exist within the space, increasing its presence without breaking the stillness entirely. The silence remains, but it now shares its space with something that does not belong to it. Time continues to gather. Each moment adds to the density of sound within the air. The intervals between fragments shorten further, though they still do not form a continuous line. The environment does not react, but it begins to feel less static, as if something beyond it is approaching without being seen. The ground remains unchanged. It continues to support the body without response, holding the same weight, maintaining the same contact. Its role does not shift, even as the space above it begins to carry more than it did before. The forest remains silent in form. No movement passes between the trees. No visible disturbance crosses the snow. Yet the silence is no longer complete. It has been altered, not by breaking, but by allowing something else to exist within it. The body remains within the same condition, still, unmoving, unaffected in posture or breath. And within that stillness, distance begins to collapse, not through movement that can be seen, but through the growing presence of something that now exists closer than before. The sounds begin to overlap, not completely, not enough to form a continuous presence, but enough that the silence no longer fully closes between them. Each fragment arrives before the previous one has entirely settled, creating a faint layering that alters the character of the air. What was once separated by stillness now begins to exist within it more densely. The direction remains uncertain. The air does not carry clarity. It absorbs and softens, preventing the sounds from extending far enough to define their origin. They arrive without clear paths, without lines that can be followed back to where they began. What is heard is presence, not location. The line of sight does not respond. It remains aligned with the same narrow opening between the trees, holding the same field of vision that has been observed from the beginning. The gaze does not widen to match the growing presence of sound. It does not follow it. It remains steady, allowing what is seen to remain unchanged. The irregularity within the distance still holds. It has not moved. It has not clarified. It exists as it did before, now accompanied by a space that feels less empty, less contained. The connection between what is seen and what is heard remains incomplete, but it begins to suggest itself, not through confirmation, but through proximity. The body remains unchanged. No tension rises through the shoulders. No shift alters the position. Breath continues in the same measured rhythm, directed downward, absorbed before it can leave a trace. The condition of stillness holds, even as the air carries more within it. You begin to notice how space becomes layered. The visible and the audible no longer feel separate. What lies beyond the field of vision begins to press into the space that can be observed, not through movement, but through the accumulation of sound that now exists within it. Distance becomes less about space and more about perception. Time continues to gather. The intervals between sounds shorten further, though they still do not fully merge. Each moment carries more presence than the last, building a continuity that has not yet formed, but is no longer absent. The forest remains visually unchanged. Trees stand without movement. Snow lies undisturbed. Light continues to fall evenly, offering no indication that anything within the environment has shifted. The form of the space remains constant, even as its presence begins to change. The ground continues to hold. It supports the body without response, unaffected by what passes above it. Its role remains fixed, constant, unchanged by the growing density within the air. The body remains within the same condition, still, unmoving, unaffected by what now surrounds it. And within that stillness, the collapse of distance continues, not through visible approach, but through the quiet accumulation of presence that now fills the space more fully than before. What was once far no longer feels so, not because it has moved, but because it has begun to arrive. The field under pressure. The space no longer holds evenly. What was once a quiet balance between ground, air, and distance begins to carry uneven weight, as if something beyond the visible field presses into it without entering fully. The snow remains undisturbed. The trees hold their stillness. Yet the space between them no longer feels neutral. It holds variation now, subtle and undefined. The sounds continue, closer together. They do not form a continuous presence, but the silence between them grows thinner, less complete. Each fragment arrives with less separation, building a density that does not break the stillness, but alters it. The air remains still, yet it carries more within it than before. The line of sight remains unchanged. The gaze does not follow the growing density of sound. It continues to return to the same narrow opening between the trees, holding the same field of vision, allowing what is visible to remain constant even as the space beyond it shifts. The irregularity within the distance remains. It has not moved. It has not clarified further. It holds its position within the field, now surrounded by a space that feels less empty, more active without visible motion. What was once isolated now exists within a broader condition that has begun to change. The body remains aligned with the ground. No adjustment follows the shift in the environment. Breath continues in its controlled rhythm, directed downward, absorbed into the snow. Hands remain steady, resting without tension. The condition of stillness holds, unaffected in form. You begin to notice how pressure exists without force. There is no impact, no visible movement that would suggest something entering the space. Yet the environment feels more contained, as if the boundaries have drawn inward, reducing the distance that once separated what could be seen from what could not. Time continues to gather. Each moment adds to the density within the air. The intervals between sounds shorten further, though they still do not merge into continuity. The environment remains visually unchanged, yet its presence grows heavier, more complete. The forest does not respond. No branch moves. No snow falls. Light remains even and unchanged. The form of the environment continues as it has, unaffected by what now exists within it. The ground remains constant. It holds the body without response, supporting the same weight, maintaining the same contact. Its role does not shift, even as the space above it begins to carry more than stillness alone. The body remains within the same condition, still, unmoving, unaffected by the pressure that now fills the space around it. And within that stillness, the field continues to narrow, not through visible change, but through the quiet accumulation of presence that now occupies it more fully than before. The density within the air continues to build, though nothing enters the field of vision to explain it. The sounds arrive more frequently now, their separation reduced to brief intervals that no longer allow the silence to fully return to what it was. Each fragment settles before the next begins, creating a continuity that remains incomplete, yet persistent enough to alter the character of the space. The direction remains uncertain. The air still absorbs and softens what it carries, preventing clear lines from forming. What is heard does not point outward. It exists within the space itself, as if the distance that once separated source and observer has folded inward without changing the visible environment. The line of sight remains steady. It does not shift to follow the growing presence of sound. It does not widen to search for its origin. It returns to the same narrow opening between the trees, holding the same alignment, allowing the visible field to remain unchanged even as what surrounds it becomes less still. The irregularity remains where it has been, unmoved, unchanged. It continues to exist within the same space, now accompanied by a presence that no longer feels distant. The connection between what is seen and what is heard remains incomplete, but it grows stronger through proximity that is felt rather than observed. The body remains unchanged. No movement follows the increasing density. No tension alters the posture. Breath continues in its controlled rhythm, directed downward, absorbed before it can leave a trace. The condition of stillness holds, uninterrupted by what now exists within the air. You begin to notice how space feels contained, not closed, but reduced. The distance that once extended outward now feels closer, not because it has physically changed, but because it no longer holds emptiness. It is filled with presence that has yet to reveal itself fully. Time continues to gather. The intervals between sounds shorten further, approaching continuity without reaching it. Each moment carries more than the last, building a condition that feels sustained, even though it has not yet fully formed. The forest remains visually unchanged. Trees stand without movement. Snow lies undisturbed. Light continues to fall evenly across every surface. The environment holds its form, unaffected by what now fills the space within it. The ground continues to support the body. It does not respond to the pressure in the air. It remains constant, carrying the same weight, maintaining the same contact. Its role remains fixed, unchanged by what passes above it. The body remains within the same condition, still, unmoving, unaffected in form, even as the space around it grows more dense, more present, more complete. And within that stillness, the field continues to hold the pressure that has settled into it, not through visible change, but through the quiet accumulation of presence that now leaves no part of the space untouched. The body that cannot continue. The condition does not break all at once. It begins in places too small to be seen from a distance, within the same stillness that has held everything together until now. The body remains aligned with the ground, unchanged in posture, unchanged in breath. Nothing in its form suggests interruption. Yet within that form, something begins to shift. Sensation, which had already narrowed, begins to withdraw further. The hands remain where they are, but their contact becomes less defined, as if the surface they rest on has moved further away without changing position. The cold, once present as a constant, no longer feels like something entering the body. It becomes something that has already settled so deeply that it no longer announces itself at all. The ground continues to hold. It supports the same weight, maintains the same contact, remains unchanged beneath the body. But the way the body exists upon it begins to alter, not through movement, but through the diminishing awareness of that contact. What was once felt directly now becomes distant, less immediate, less present. The line of sight remains steady. The gaze continues to return to the same narrow opening between the trees, holding the same alignment, observing the same field. Nothing in the act of seeing reflects the change that has begun within the body. The irregularity remains where it has been. The environment continues as before. The air remains still. It carries the same density, the same layered presence that has gathered over time. Sound continues to exist within it, arriving in fragments that no longer feel separate from the space itself. The environment holds its form, even as it continues to shift in presence. You begin to notice how the body's stillness changes in quality. It is no longer only the absence of movement. It begins to resemble the absence of response. The difference is subtle, but it grows through time as the ability to adjust, to react, to correct, becomes less immediate, less available. The breath continues, but it does not carry the same clarity. It remains controlled, measured, yet it feels further removed from awareness, as if it continues without being followed. The rhythm holds, but the connection to it becomes less defined. Time continues to gather. It does not mark the change. It does not separate what has been from what is now occurring. It accumulates, extending the condition as it has from the beginning, even as the nature of that condition begins to shift. The forest remains unchanged. Trees stand still. Snow lies undisturbed. Light continues to fall evenly across every surface. Nothing within the visible environment reflects what is beginning to occur. The body remains aligned with the ground. No movement breaks the posture. No adjustment follows the change. The position holds, as it has from the beginning, even as the ability to maintain it begins to exist without the same control. And within that stillness, the body continues, not through effort, not through decision, but through the continuation of a condition that has begun to move beyond the point where it can be fully sustained. The change does not announce itself as failure. It arrives as a quiet reduction, a narrowing of what remains available to the body without altering its outward form. The position holds. The alignment with the ground remains intact. Nothing shifts in a way that would be visible from a distance. Yet the capacity that once sustained this stillness begins to withdraw, not suddenly, but gradually, through absence rather than interruption. The hands remain where they have been, but the certainty of their contact fades further. What they rest upon continues to exist, unchanged, yet the connection becomes less immediate, as if the surface has receded without moving. The ability to respond to that contact, to adjust, to correct, no longer rises easily. It exists, but at a distance. The breath continues, but it no longer feels guided. It maintains its rhythm, steady and controlled, yet the awareness that once shaped it begins to thin. Each inhale and exhale occurs as before, but the sense of directing it, of maintaining it with intention, begins to dissolve into something more automatic, less connected to conscious presence. The ground continues to hold. It does not respond to what is changing above it. It remains constant, supporting the same weight, maintaining the same contact. Its role does not alter, even as the body's relationship to it begins to shift. The line of sight remains unchanged. The gaze continues to rest on the same narrow field between the trees. The irregularity remains where it has been, still unresolved in form, yet no longer uncertain in presence. The environment continues to reveal nothing new, even as what observes it begins to change. You begin to notice how stillness becomes indistinguishable from absence. Not absence of form, but absence of response. The body remains present within the environment, but the ability to engage with that environment begins to diminish. What once required continuous, quiet maintenance now continues without that same connection. The air remains dense. It holds the same layered presence, the same accumulation of sound that no longer feels distant. The environment continues to exist as it has, unaffected in form, yet altered in presence. Time continues to gather. It does not pause. It does not mark this change. It extends outward as it has from the beginning, carrying the condition forward without distinguishing between what has been sustained and what has begun to fade. The forest remains unchanged. Trees stand still. Snow lies undisturbed. Light continues to fall evenly. Nothing within the visible space reflects the shift that has taken place. The body remains aligned with the ground, still, unmoving, but no longer sustained in the same way. And within that stillness, continuation becomes something that no longer depends on effort, no longer depends on control, but exists only because nothing has yet occurred to interrupt it. After the snow holds everything, the forest remains. Long after the condition has passed, after the presence that once lay within it has been removed, the ground continues to hold its quiet shape. Snow settles where it falls, covering what was once pressed into it, softening the surface until no trace of position remains. The narrow opening between the trees still exists, unchanged in its form, offering the same distance it always has, though nothing now occupies it in the same way. Light returns in slow variations. Days lengthen, though not abruptly. The pale sky begins to carry more distinction, separating itself from the ground with a clarity that was not present before. Shadows form again, faint at first, then more defined as the sun begins to move higher across the horizon. The surface of the snow reflects this change without altering its quiet stillness. The air moves again. Not strongly, not enough to disturb the larger shape of the forest, but enough to carry small shifts across the surface. Fine layers of snow lift and settle in new patterns, erasing what had once been carefully shaped. What remains is not the memory of position, but the continuation of the environment itself. You stand at a distance that no longer needs to be held. The space between observer and ground feels different now, not because it has changed physically, but because it no longer contains the same presence. The silence remains, but it has lost the density it once carried. It is lighter, less complete, allowing sound to move through it in ways it did not before. Nothing marks what occurred here. No visible trace remains to confirm that the ground once held a form aligned so precisely within it. The snow has closed over every detail. The trees offer no indication. The air carries nothing forward. What existed within this space has passed without leaving anything that can be seen. Time continues to move, not as accumulation now, but as passage. Moments follow one another with clearer distinction. Light changes. Air shifts. The forest returns to a rhythm that includes variation, that allows movement to exist without breaking the quiet entirely. The absence becomes part of the landscape, not as something noticed, but as something accepted. The space that once held presence now holds only what remains: snow, trees, air, light. Nothing within it suggests that anything has been lost. It continues as it always has, indifferent to what has passed through it. And yet, something remains. Not in the ground, not in the air, not in the trees, but in the understanding of what it was to exist within that stillness, to remain without movement, to see without searching, to act without breaking the silence. The forest does not remember, but the condition does. It exists beyond the space where it occurred, carried not by the environment, but by the quiet recognition of what was required to sustain it. And as the light continues to move across the snow, and the air carries its first gentle shifts through the trees, the stillness does not disappear. It changes. It loosens. But it remains, somewhere within the rhythm of the world, as a reminder that even in the quietest places, something once held its position long enough to become part of what cannot be seen, but can still be understood. You've been part of echoes of war, where stories rise on quiet wings, and the past still circles above us, refusing to land.